Around 7 years ago, I was in a relatively rough place in my life. Having been recently broken up with my longtime girlfriend at the time, I slumped into a depression. I experienced a lot of strange things that were new to me at this time. One of those being the depression itself, the other being denial, which is a feeling I find almost impossible to explain. It's like my mind was no longer in control of what was coming out of my mouth. I knew what reality was, but I felt like I couldn't acknowledge it. It was a very, very strange thing. But another thing I experienced around this time, for the first time in my life, was introspection. Here I was, 20-year-old man, and I'd never bothered to take the time to actually look inward and to take a look at myself. I never bothered to take a look at the state of my life or to look at the state of my beliefs. I was self-centered, I was narcissistic, and I was never wrong. Or so I thought. Looking back, it makes a lot of sense why my girlfriend at the time left me. I thought her leaving me was something that came out of nowhere, but that couldn't be further from the truth. I had it coming for a very long time. Around this time, I also found a YouTuber called DietCokeWithCherry.
Guess she's older one day if I tried a little harder, get a little farther than before. But I don't have the strength, you see, sometimes it all just gets to me. The things that you've said to me and more. You broke, I know you did, but I broke too. In fact, upon reflection, I broke twice as much as you, twice as likely to last.
Through her videos and original music, I came to realize where I was in life, that I made many mistakes. I realized that I had many flaws, and that I had a lot of work to do if I wanted to be anything I felt I or anybody else should have value in. At this time, as cheesy as it may sound, I left this comment on a video of hers that's now unfortunately privatized. This was closer to 7 years ago than it is to 6, but I wrote, "Reminds me of my ex and all the work I had to do on myself to stop myself from breaking when it comes to the next girl. The song makes me sad and sentimental though, and for inspiring an emotion in my real life, you've earned what will be yet another subscriber." Diet Coke with Cherry will play a big role in the message I want to get across in this video, and I'm sure it'll all make sense soon. Eventually, I did look inward. I stopped drinking and having sex with any random person who would have me, and living a lifestyle that was acting as nothing more than a band-aid over a festering and infected wound. Eventually, I spotted my mistakes, and I worked on them. I tried to be somebody for the next girl who comes along. The next girl would come along in spring 2011. And in spring of 2016, almost 5 years to the date, we got engaged. However, this engagement came just a few days before our 5-year anniversary, as my fiancé on that day would not be conscious. My fiancé was born with scoliosis, and it was not a minor case of it. If you see her in public, you would not notice unless you were looking for it, because she was lucky enough, in a manner of speaking, to have her curves more or less cancel each other out. But with time and age, the curve and pain that goes with it would eventually get worse, and the time it would shave off her life would only grow. We tried a few different methods before she ultimately made the decision to get surgery. When I realized at no point during any of this did I have any hesitation about supporting her, I realized I had no hesitation of living my entire life with her, regardless of what that life was going to be. I sent her mother a picture of the ring over Facebook a few months before the surgery and asked, "What do you think?" And just like that, it was set. The cat was out of the bag. The family knew, and our engagement was only a matter of time. Just a few days before the surgery, we were engaged. The night before the surgery, we tried our best to live and act as normally as we could. though I believe we were both very scared. The surgery involved cutting open a large section down her spine and installing metal rods to force her back into being straight. Mortality was a real concern, and paralysis was a concern just as high. We spent the last night making a large pot of beef chili. On the morning of the surgery, we awoke at 5 a.m. I put on a stupid Christmas sweater with a pug on it, hoping it would be a good way to lighten the mood for the day, and keep my mind and others occupied at least a little bit. We drove to the hospital. My family drove 3 hours to be with me and offer support, and her family came as well. We stayed with her every moment we could, as she was visited and talked to by surgeons and anesthesiologists. When we were ushered out and she was wheeled away, reality was inescapable. Walking away was some of the heaviest steps I ever had to take. I was encouraged to bring my 3DS and a book because we would be spending the day in a waiting room. These were the longest hours of my life. My head was spinning. I couldn't think straight. I tried to read, I tried to turn on a game, but I couldn't focus on anything, least of all that, despite my family trying to tell me to occupy my mind. I left for half an hour with the family to get some food. I ordered what I thought would be a delicious burger at the time, but did not eat much of it. I was more concerned about getting back to the hospital. Back at the hospital, supper time was approaching when we finally got a visit. I listened intently to every word that came out of the doctor's mouth. The surgery was a success. I had no words besides thank you. And I broke down crying in front of her family and mine. My fiancée was moved to intensive care for a while before she would get moved elsewhere. Only one of us was allowed to go see her. On this day, she asked me to take pictures and film as much as I could for her own records. I still find these videos very, very hard to look at. Not any fatter than usual.
So you didn't take offense to his...
No.
It's closer to 5.
I'm really tired.
The time I was allowed to visit her was brief, but important. I had no clue what to say and could never understand whatever it was she was feeling at the time. My biggest goal in talking to her was to help her feel normal and comfortable. I remember telling her we'd have her out and drinking loads of chocolate milk in no time. It's her favorite. When you're a little more conscious, I'll see what I can do about getting you some chocolate milk.
That would be fantastic.
This visit ended after about 10 to 15 minutes. By nightfall, she was in a private room. Though I wasn't supposed to stay past visiting hours, some of the nurses were kind enough to turn a blind eye. I slept beside her hospital bed for the first 2 days, across 2 chairs, leaving only often enough to take care of business that had to be attended to before we brought her home. The whole house needed to be outfitted for her new level of mobility. Think of it like baby-proofing a house. The doctors had her up and walking the very morning after surgery. Though these exercises were brief, they were supposed to get more intense each day. After only 2 nights, she was discharged from the hospital. We spent a grand total of 48 hours here after surgery. The car ride home, I could not drive above 30 kilometers an hour because every small bump in the road was incredible pain for her. Luckily, we did not live too far from the hospital. Unluckily, it was a 3-story climb to our apartment with no elevator. The first few days at home were scary. My fiancée was on a heavy dose of Dilaudid, and in between doses she was given a healthy diet of children's liquid Tylenol. For days she could hardly keep her eyes open, and for nearly a week she would not eat anything, short of 1 to 2 spoonfuls of the chili we made prior to her surgery, and a ton of water. How she survived on such a small diet I'll never understand. After a week, she was able to walk to the living room and back and sit in a chair for about 10 to 20 minutes at a time. She could stay awake long enough to watch a movie, but beyond that, it seemed like it wasn't going anywhere. Staying awake was not easy, and her mind seemed pretty vacant, perhaps a side effect of being on so many painkillers. Progress was slow, but it turned around a short while later. It seemed like all at once one day she was able to stay awake for the entirety of a day. This happened when she occupied her mind with the HD remake of a game very close to her heart. Once she had the strength again to lift a controller, she started in on Twilight Princess HD. This kept her occupied and awake. She would play this for hours and stop only to get some exercise. Following this, she played the Danganronpa games. Being physically and mentally engaged in her medium seemed to make all the difference in the world. By the end of the month, she had kicked the painkillers, and in only 5 to 6 weeks, she felt good enough to go back to work. However, I made sure she didn't return to work. She was given 2 months off at a minimum, and I made sure that at a minimum she took 2 months off. Once she could keep herself occupied, her recovery time sped up at an exponential rate. Maybe video games aren't exactly to thank for this, but from where I sit, Twilight Princess and her passion for the game definitely seems like the catalyst that turned this all around. Her 1-year anniversary to her surgery is this week, and she will be providing an update on a channel I've linked in the description. Now, to bookend this video, I'd like to bring this back to Diet Coke with Cherry. Diet Coke with Cherry was very influential in my life in 2010, and she was again just last year when she brought about a realization in me of a stark reality I've always known but never personally felt affected by until then. I have always felt a kind of bond and kinship with Diet Coke with Cherry despite never meeting her. I've always held her in high esteem, so it was heartbreaking to me to see her upload the following video after such a long absence from YouTube.
Ask you a question. I didn't need you to reply. Is it getting heavy?
It was here the weight of reality reached its perigee for me. I became very aware that behind every person I see on the street, every person I see on the screen, or every person who takes my order out of McDonald's or bags my groceries out of Walmart, there's an entire unseen history that led them to that moment. There's this entire life unfolding beyond what we can see. Sometimes behind the facade, people's entire lives are in turmoil. Sometimes the people with smiles are falling apart. I kept my content going at this time as best as I could while my fiancée slept her days away. But this was our life in 2016. My fiancée is back at work now. The recovery process will last years or perhaps even decades, and some things will never be possible for her again. But every day is not the same pain it once was, and we are living happily. Since the surgery, we saved some cash, got a mortgage on a new house, financed a new car, and expanded our family to include 2 new fur babies, and finally, now almost 1 year to the date, that I proposed to her from our living room of our little 2-bedroom apartment. The wedding planning is finally starting. That proposal story is a story for another time, however. Anyway, guys, as a 1-year anniversary for the surgery, I thought I'd make this video and explain what my life was like in 2016 behind the scenes. Thanks for watching. I hope this story gives you some insight, not just on my life, but on what the potential life of anybody you see in the run of a day might be. So be kind to one another, because you never know what's going on behind the scenes.